Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers, and welcome to this Development Control Committee meeting on the 2nd of December 2015. First of all, for your greater safety, I must read out the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and you meet in the War Memorial Park. This meeting is being webcast, isn't it? Yeah. Working? Yeah. So it's on live. Mobile phones. Please can all members and public switch their phones to off or turn to silent. Thank you. And I then, first of all, thank you, members, for moving your chairs so that we can see the screen. Much appreciated. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have none. Declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest? None. Urgent matters. I have none. Minutes of the committee meeting held on the 4th of November, paper A. Do I have your permission, members, to sign that? Agreed. Thank you. I then move on to here. For the benefit of the members of the public attending, I would like to explain who everybody is in this table. My name is Councillor Donald Sherlock, and I am the chairman of this committee, and Councillor David Leake is the deputy chairman. Down the sides of the table to the left and right are the councillors who sit on the committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications this evening. Immediately to my left and right are the officers who will be advising councillors. In addition, I'd like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be looking at the evidence brought before it tonight and will make a decision based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning guidance and policy, and I do understand that planning can be an emotive issue, and I ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout the evening. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep any comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. Thank you. We now move to item number 5 on the agenda, which is the application for planning permissions, and we start with number 1, land to the north of Sherfield Road, Bramley. And I have public speakers of Parish Town Council Tony Durrant, objector Mr. Malcolm Bell, in support Rebecca McAllister, and the ward councillor, Councillor Robinson. And you will each get 4 minutes, and I will give you a minute's notice at the end, and it will be presented by Patricia Logie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline planning application for residential development of up to 50 dwellings, including affordable housing with associated access, highway works, drainage works, SUDs, public open space, landscaping and any other associated infrastructure, with all matters reserved except for means of access. There is an update for this report, which is on page 1 of the update papers. There were additional comments received from Bramley Parish Council on the officer report, which are provided in full. There was additional comments from the applicant, which have been summarised. There was an additional comment from our policy team, which has been summarised. And there was some public observation that had been missed off the end of the report. There's a comment, officer comment, in the update on all the further information, which does not change the recommendation as listed on the main papers, although there is a modification to condition 13, which is on page 40 of your main papers, but the modification is printed from the bottom of page 6 on the update, and then there was a tree informative to go on the application as well. Members visited the site last Friday, which is also on the update.
Thank you, Patricia. Right, our first speaker is Tony Durant from the Parish Council.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving us time to speak tonight. Bramley Parish Council has already provided a very detailed and factual responses to both the application and the officer's report. I will not take up your valuable time tonight by repeating these in detail. Suffice to say that we believe there is an overwhelming factual evidence to support a rejection of this application. I will, however, make a few points. Contrary to the officer's report, the applicant did not consult publicly on the 50-dwelling application, on this 50-dwelling application, and the applicant did not conduct a full leaflet drop to all households on the earlier proposal for up to 200 homes on this site. We note, however, that they are seeking 130 dwellings via an emission site submission in the ELP. This two or more phase approach to the development across the site has certainly had no consultation with the PC or the wider community. The Parish Council has previously proposed to the officer that this application should therefore be resubmitted for the full numbers of dwellings planned at such a time that the inspector concludes his report on the emission sites. Our MP has written to the BDBC Chief Executive stating that the ELP and the emerging NDP have weight in the planning process and should be respected. This is contrary to the statements made in the officer's report. You're all aware of the flood zones on this site and have seen the photographic evidence for flooding and saturation of the site and the adjacent Strawberry Fields development, a development that no doubt also claimed flood mitigation, which is clearly ineffective. The offering of the flood zone by the applicant and the acceptance of this by the officer as open space and play area is nothing short of cynical and hollow, in our opinion. I trust that we've all noted that in the responses given by the Parish Council. Let me make it very clear, there is no affordable housing need in Bramley that is not already catered for. There are no demonstrable facts provided either by the applicant or the officer to support any further need in Bramley. Approved applications in the parish are providing 250 new social and affordable homes versus the current parish need of 72 homes, therefore a considerable contribution to the borough's needs. There are no significant employment opportunities in Bramley, and again neither the applicant nor officer has identified any new opportunities. 82% of the working population travel to work by private car, hence our very real ongoing concerns re the sustainability of the C32 and the local limited rural network. The primary school, we believe, is at its maximum size in relation to open space to pupil ratios before we even talk about the continuing deterioration of the education standards since the last significant development imposed on Bramley. We do not have a secondary school. The S106 allocation related to this application seems to us a little spurious as it provides insufficient funds to complete any of the projects listed. The officer's report takes into consideration the developer's somewhat generic and unsubstantiated comments in favour for approval, and whilst listing the objections raised by those that actually live in the community, pays no heed to their factual content. They are dismissed entirely or at best deemed irrelevant by ill-defined and inadequate words claiming mitigation. Approving this development because of the 5-year land supply situation, despite Bramley's significant contribution already, and a borough need for social and affordable housing, will set a precedent that will open up the entire C32 corridor to unplanned, unnecessary and ill-considered development, thus destroying Bramley's rural setting. What is a great concern to Bramley and should be to other parishes and existing settlement areas is the officer's apparent predetermination that any rejection would fail on appeal and thus BDBC would incur costs. The voters, taxpayers and residents of Bramley expect this council to object to the development and if necessary present a robust defence on appeal. The Bramley community would like some of its taxes to be spent on its defence from unsustainable and inappropriate developments such as this. We would ask you to refuse approval for this development. Thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Durant. Now, any questions for Mr. Durant, members? No questions? Councillor Bound.
Yes, the primary school. Primary school, is it primary? Or yes. Yes. It has already expanded, hasn't it, to...
It's expanded once already and is pretty much full and is still continuing to suffer with education deficiencies. Sorry.
So how much area around the school is there to expand into? Or would
There is a field to the back, which I gather does get very wet. I'm not sure that's even owned by the school. I think it's leased off of Stratfield Say, but I would have to check that. It's not a huge space. Without having the measurements, to me it doesn't look any bigger than the footprint of the buildings, but I don't know.
Okay, so the whatever is left, is that playing field for the school? It's used by the school as...
That's the playing field, and some land to the side of the school as well, on the entrance way in.
Councillor Tucker.
Sorry, I'm going slightly off-piste with my questions. Has it ever been put to you that it might be a good idea if the school were moved to, say, for instance, the application site, and then houses put on where the school is? I mean, this is just my own idea, but I just wonder, it seemed to me would help dramatically the problems you have with cars, etc.
I believe it was mooted once by a previous parish council. It was objected to very strongly by the residents, and that reflected in the voting pattern at the next parish council elections.
Any more questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Durrant. Next, please, Mr. Malcolm Bell. And you, Mr. Bell, will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 129 objections and a petition containing 198 signatories, a further 99 responses to a recent survey, with 96% saying no more, and the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan with the comments on housing from 452 respondents, all saying Bramley enough is enough at this time, with the 200 house allocation in the submission local plan being met through Mitchins Lane, Bullsdown Farm and Razors Farm, a large percentage of which is in Bramley. Why no? Comments made are massive shortfall in infrastructure in the village unable to support more housing, roads choked up, one small shop, school breaking at the seams, and near if not at the top limit of pupil/area requirement. Village amenities cannot support more people, keep Bramley rural. And so they go on. This application ignores all of this and relies on the framework, dismissing the local plan as it expired in 2011, the emerging plan not being in place, and the neighbourhood plan has not been adopted. The neighbourhood plan is not against housing development, but states through consultation that housing development in excess of the 200 allocated and outside of the lifetime of the plan be at a build of 50 houses per site in keeping with the rural aspect, but first get the infrastructure right to cope with the existing population. This application, whilst dismissing the neighbourhood plan with one hand, conveniently refers to the 50 houses per site and states that the application is therefore in accord with the neighbourhood plan. You can't have it both ways. Having good infrastructure in place for housing and its residents is of paramount importance. This council acknowledges that in the case of Manydown, you are not going to develop it until you are sure the infrastructure is correctly planned. In the case of Manydown, you even state in the Basingstoke and Dean today that the community is going to be involved in the planning to make sure, obviously in this case, that you create, quoting paragraph 2.5 of the submission local plan, inviting places and communities where people want to live, feel they belong, and achieve the objective that states enrich the vitality and character of our villages. These objectives are mirrored in our neighbourhood plan. The residents of Bramley are voicing what they want in Bramley through petitions, through the neighbourhood plan, and this council supports neighbourhood planning, as does our MP. More housing in Bramley without prior planning to address the present infrastructure shortfalls, never mind the needs associated with extra housing, is going to destroy Bramley. Significant planned infrastructure improvements are required, not ad hoc bits that come from houses plonked on sites by prospective developers in the knowledge that they can contribute to the housing shortage in the borough. No thought as to what it will do to the quality of life, in this case the residents in Bramley. A key priority of the submission local plan is to improve residents' quality of life, ensure residents and future generations continue and enjoy an excellent quality of life, confirmed in the recent circular by the leader of this council.
1 minute.
Are these just words on a piece of paper with no meaning, no substance? If that is the case, you are ignoring your vision, your objectives, and it says to the community, housing numbers are of paramount importance and the views of the community through community consultations, neighbourhood planning, stating shortfalls that want addressing to give the quality of life that you envisage carry no weight. All you are doing is following a laid down procedure and numbers is the game. This housing application, like others in this window of opportunity, having no local plan and no adopted neighbourhood plan, is not contributing anything to Bramley Village. You have to reject this application as a start, look to the views of the community and plan properly to address the shortfalls before having houses just contributing to numbers on a piece of paper. It should not be just numbers, but quality of life that has to be maintained, improved through any development and not destroyed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Bell? No? Thank you, Mr. Bell. Next, please, in support, Rebecca McAllister. Four minutes, Mr. McAllister, and I'll give you a minute's notice.
Okay, thank you. You have before you a scheme that has no technical objections and that your officers have found acceptable. I ask you to accept this recommendation, but in doing so wish to respond to some of the key concerns raised by the Parish Council and local residents. Firstly, the planning application followed engagement with both council officers and the local community, initially in the form of a leaflet drop for a much bigger scheme, and then a public exhibition during which the Parish Council explicitly told us that they were looking for smaller sites of about 50 dwellings. We listened, we reduced the size of the scheme to ensure that there would be absolutely no impact on the conservation area and to respond to the views expressed by the Parish Council. The principle of this planning application accords with the objectives of the Emerging Neighbourhood Plan, which is supportive of individual developments of up to 50 dwellings on sites which are contiguous with the settlement policy boundary. As recognised by the Chairman of the Neighbourhood Plan in his consultation response to this application, I quote, "This is what the community want, accepting that further housing will occur, but not in the immediate future." But this is simply, there is no policy justification for only accepting 50 units at some point in the future, not now. In fact, the Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and as such there is a current, unmet and rising housing need across the borough, and the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. Furthermore, you will be aware of the very recent changes which the Council has made to their emerging local plan, which now requires at least 200 homes to come forward in Bramley. This is a clear indication that the 200 figure is not a ceiling to development. There are no objections to the scheme from any technical consultees, and that includes flood risk and drainage matters. Both the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority have no objection. No built development is proposed in the flood zone, and through the use of sustainable urban drainage techniques, detention basins and swales, the scheme will secure the long-term flood management of the site and will in fact offer a betterment over the existing situation. And highways, again, no objections from the Council's highway officer. The scheme will deliver highway safety measures, including improving the pedestrian island to the west of the proposed site access, and there's the potential to connect to the existing footpath along the western boundary, which would enable school children to walk safely to and from school. Finally, Bramley really is a sustainable village. The site is sustainably located. It has more services and facilities than most villages in the borough. Doctor surgery, a primary school, and most importantly it has a train station which provides sustainable travel to Basingstoke and Reading. The 50 dwellings must be viewed within the context of the government's clear drive to boost significantly the supply of new homes.
1 minute.
The Council's failure to provide a 5-year supply of housing is precisely why housing sites such as this must be granted. You know people are seriously struggling to get on the property ladder and own their own home, so we need to build more homes. Yet this council isn't providing enough houses to meet the needs of its residents. It's as simple as that. This is a good housing site. Also, we respectfully ask that you do the right thing and you resolve to grant planning permission tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McAllister. Members, any questions? Councillor Tomlin.
Good evening. Just the question about this wording of at least 200 houses for the neighbourhood development plan change. My understanding is that that was a reaction for the inquiry, mainly driven by developers, not the inspector, but we as a borough have written to the inspector with those wording a suggested change for him to consider, and then it will go out to public consultation. So I refute your point where you say it's actually the borough's view. It's an emerging view. It may not be the view.
That is the council's proposed suggested changing wording following debate at the examination, and it's a response of officers to provide more flexibility, and it's basically to ensure that the numbers in the core strategy in the local plan will be delivered. So it's basically not a ceiling to development, and it's to provide that flexibility. And I know that the council have written a justification for why that proposed wording is in the suggested changes that admittedly will go out for consultation.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mr McAllister. Councillor Tomlin, do you want to speak now or later, or I've got Councillor Robinson to speak as well. Yes, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, everybody. This unwelcome development is outside the scope of the emerging local plan and outside the scope of the emerging neighbourhood plan, both of which should be respected in the planning process. The purpose of a neighbourhood plan is to allow local people to decide on the future development of their area. There have, I believe, been 129 objections to this development and 198 signatories to a petition. The people of Bramley have decided and said no. Bramley was allocated 200 houses in the emerging local plan. This is more than met by the approved Minchin's Lane development. If planning policy SS5 is to be amended to at least 200 houses, then what is the acceptable maximum? This totally negates the purpose of the neighbourhood plan and the local plan, and sets a dangerous precedent for the whole of Basingstoke and Deane. Bramley's population has grown by 51% in 15 years, and with Minchin's Lane, Razors Farm and Upper Cufford Farm developments all to go ahead, it will have doubled between 2000 and 2010. Please imagine what this would do to your community. Our MP recently wrote in the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill, infrastructure must come before development so that the infrastructure deficit is mitigated. Bramley has had minimal infrastructure improvements, particularly the C32 has received no improvement despite carrying 5,000 cars per day. 3,000 cars per day use the railway crossing, despite it being closed for 35 minutes per hour, sometimes for 15 minutes at a time. This causes logjam throughout the village. The C32 is the only access to this development and remains unlit. There have been no additional sports facilities and only a small committee room has been added to the village hall. The village pub and recently opened youth club only cater for a small section of the community. Antisocial behaviour and vandalism have increased significantly. The village shop is inadequate for the population and has insufficient parking, causing road safety concerns. The local school has been in special measures, largely as a result of its recent overexpansion. Bramley is a low-lying area, and the area of this development floods, and so will these homes. Impervious surfaces cause rapid water runoff and flash flooding. The attenuation basins planned cannot work as they are regularly below the natural water level of the site. This will result in increased fluvial flooding in Sherfield. this issue remains unaddressed. I'm sure we all remember the misery and chaos caused by flooding in Buckskin 2 years ago. That was unforeseen and caused by unprecedented rainfall. Extreme weather events are becoming more common, and flooding of this development is not unforeseen but inevitable. I ask the committee, for the sake of the residents of Bramley, both present and future, please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Any questions for Councillor Potter?
Hello, Councillor Robinson. Could I just check, I mean, in your preamble at the beginning, you were talking about the scheme being outside the scope. That was the word you used, of the emerging local plan and the neighbourhood plan. When you say scope, what do you mean by that?
Sorry, perhaps I should have used the word findings rather than scope. Bramley clearly was designated for 200 houses. That is already covered by the 250 going in on Minchin's Lane, and that figure was agreed in the local plan as 200. 250, we are well over that, over what was agreed in the local plan already.
Councillor Westbrook.
Councillor Robinson. There's been quite a bit of mention about the emerging local plan, and in particular, I think it's 4.29, which is to do with the additional 200 homes. The next point on the emerging local plan is 4.3, which says that development could be brought forward on multiple sites or one phase site to ensure proposals respond positively to the character of the area and help create a more integrated community. Would you not consider that this development situated alongside other new developments in Bramley could be seen to chime with that statement? Sorry.
Sorry, not. I think Councillor Tomlin would be better at answering that question than I am. He's considerably more familiar with the Bramley area and with the emerging local plans.
Any more questions? Do you want to answer that?
Well, yeah, the situation that Bramley faces is that in the beginning of our local plan building together, it was quite adamant that we would have this allocation of 200 houses. Now, I know we're talking furthermore, that may change in the numbers, but a neighbourhood development plan is quite a big ask of people, and a lot of people came forward, and there's been a strong core leadership team, and they've done a lot of very good work, and they've done a lot of consultation with people, and they've got a lot of good feeling for what constitutes development. Now, they have embraced the neighbourhood plan, and they have made these comments of 50 houses maximum developments, and that was the way it was going. And then we had the situation of the 5-year housing supply and the no plan in place. So along came Minchin's Lane rather sooner than expected, and for the numbers the developers wanted. So the whole thing is in a slight change of flux, and so what we're trying to reel from is that I'll cover this in a moment, but the impact of these extra houses in one hit, the village is going to take a little while to adjust to what's been actually granted. So any more is just too much to take in a deep breath. I can't see that any extra houses right now or following on from Minchin's will actually do anything to enhance the village. It would be the opposite. The big thing the village wants, which no one can deliver, is a clear road without a level crossing, for instance, and that's never going to happen. The C32 has major safety issues. Money can be thrown at these things, but and I'll come on to the school, but money can be thrown at the school, but it is not working. So there are many, many challenges going on right now, and it's just too much too soon, all cramming in at the beginning of our local plan because of the situation we find ourselves with the planning rules. So I don't know if that does answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions for Councillor Robinson? Thank you. Councillor Tomlin, do you want to make a statement, or do you want to just speak later?
Can I speak just before we go into debate, or as we go into debate?
Yes, we'll do questions to officers now.
Thank you.
Okay, members, questions to officers. Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Tucker.
Could I just check? I think probably Mr. Townsend may be the one to answer this. I mean, the references that have been made to the amendments to the emerging local plan in terms of the inspectors' process thus far. I mean, I know officers have been quoted in regard to the amendment vis-à-vis the 200 houses and the changes to at least 200 houses, and I know it's going to be subject to consultation. But presumably that wording that has been submitted to the inspector was signed off by the cabinet member with responsibilities for planning, wasn't it?
Yes, there is a case in terms of the delegation to the portfolio holder for planning. I think the issue here is that whether it says up to 200 or at least 200, I think there's an overriding issue here, which is what weight can be given to the emerging local plan in its entirety at this moment in time. That's set out in the officer's report, in that while the local plan is obviously emerging, we've got past the examination in public stage, we still have to go through the proposed modifications and then further consultation that's been discussed this evening already, and on that basis, effectively, the officer's report confirms that very limited weight can be given to the emerging local plan in any case, so to a degree that up to or at least is somewhat of a moot point.
Councillor Tucker.
Thank you. I wonder, can you explain to me how the numbers of the Upper Cufford Farm and Razors Farm get included in or around about the 200? Because it obviously is a lot more, isn't it? Is it still within the neighbourhood plan numbers, or?
Certainly I know that it's in terms of obviously what the parish council set out in terms of it being within the parish boundary, but again, I don't think that in itself is something that is before the committee in terms of it being a material consideration, because effectively the emerging local plan, which obviously set out those development sites as potential sites, one of which obviously has planning permission now, hasn't got to that stage where weight can be given to it in any case. So in some ways it doesn't have a significant impact on the determination of this planning application at this moment in time.
Can I? Sorry, I'm obviously asking the wrong questions, but it is within Bramley, and do the people who are looking at the neighbourhood plan for Bramley, do they try to include the Razors Farm and the Upper Cufford Lane Farm?
The figures that have come through from the parish and Bramley neighbourhood development is sort of all the development in Bramley. The 200 figure is coming from the emerging local plan policy. So that is what Mike's was saying, that the emerging local plan is just that. It has a figure of at least or up to or however that is finally worded, but it's still emerging and it's still waiting for an inspector's response. So it kind of doesn't include any housing at the moment. It's just that's what I mean. That the 200 figure is from the emerging local plan.
It's just something more for the Bramley people to worry about.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. Question for the officers. More a point of clarification, really. On page 25 of 119, under flood risk, it says that the lead local flood authority were consulted on the application and originally objected to the proposal. Am I correct in thinking that their concerns were about development on flood zones 2 and 3, which have now been alleviated as the application is to build on flood zone 1 only and impose an additional 8-metre buffer zone alongside Bramley Green Stream?
The lead local flood authority objected originally because they didn't. I think it was the mathematics behind the drainage strategies and the numbers. There was a lot of toing and froing between the applicant and the lead local flood authority that resulted in a revised flood risk assessment being received that had additional information, more tables of mathematics and figures. It's looking at the amount of surface water runoff that comes from the development, and not every site has an amount of runoff that runs off already at the moment. And the aim of the drainage strategy that's outlined in the flood risk assessment is that the application will hold its surface water runoff and not release it into the water system any more than it currently does. That's the aim of the drainage strategy. The development itself didn't change at all through the application process, in terms of it was an outline application with indicative layout, with all the development being in flood zone 1. It's just that the lead flood risk authority wanted some more information before, so they objected to the application until they received that additional information, and then they provided those comments that are on page 25. The buffer relationship is actually a requirement of the Environment Agency, and that's more of an environmental issue to keep the area of the river green, for want of a better word.
So it's the changes to the drainage system from the original that's been improved that's mean it's acceptable now. I'm just trying to get clarity.
Yeah, the amendments to the flood risk assessment was quite a lot of technical amendments to the appendices and the mathematics and the flows, but there was a lot of discussion that I was copied into from the flood directly between the applicant and the flood risk authority, and so then we asked them for a completely revised flood risk assessment that included all the conversations and additional information. That whole document was sent to the lead flood risk authority as one submission, and they came back with the comments that are on page 25.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the same line with the same picture, actually. In all that mathematics then that came back, did it take any account, or what formulas it may have given you, that show where that red dot is on there, that in fact that entire road and the C32 alongside the site were flooded, and have been flooded over the last 18 months? We've got current pictures of it underwater, water lapping up to front doorsteps. So it sort of seems to be missing from that plan, or was anything like that taken into account in what you've read? Thank you.
I don't know. I can't understand the appendices and all the technical mathematics and flow rates and things, so that's why we use the lead local flood authority. But the flood drainage strategy can only be responsible for the development itself. It can't be responsible for other developments. And I said the aim of it is every piece of land will have a runoff, like an agricultural land will have a certain amount of runoff, a built-up area will have a certain amount of runoff, and the flood risk assessment and the drainage strategy is trying to, so that the development holds on to its own water that it creates, and then it releases its own water into the system at no more of a rate than it currently exists. It can't be responsible for anybody else's water.
Any more questions? Well, then let us move into debate. Or do you want to speak, Councillor Tomlin? Yes, of course you can.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as we go into debate, members, I just wanted to sum up what we've heard and things that perhaps we could consider that we could look at. You've heard Bramley has expanded from, 1991 to 2011 census data show a 200% expansion in housing, and Councillor Nick Robinson there told you even more is coming with the local plan potential. So it's expanded like no other area in the borough. This particular development, really, it's outside our settlement policy boundary, the old plan, of course. It's in the open countryside. It's not in our emerging local plan, and it's not being considered originally by the local neighbour development plan. So it really is a chance for the developer to take advantage, as we know, of the 5-year housing supply and the no local plan in place. Now, again, we talked, and I spoke earlier as an answer, that we've had lots of housing, the Minsons Lane 200 odd houses is amply met the needs of the parish as regards housing, and indeed pretty much that of the draft local plan, where we are with that. We've got to consider, and members who were on the bus trip on Friday, we were stopped at the level crossing and could enjoy the view of the Bramley infrastructure. I mean, we have a barber's now, that's new, a pub, bakery, one-stop shop and a car garage and an estate agent. There's limited employment opportunities. We have massive parking issues at the station. And again, we read that most local people use the car. 74% of them use the car for commuting. So you know, I can't see that these people in this area will be any leased car users. We talked about the school. Councillor Bound, you asked about the school. Last time it expanded, it went into special measures. We've had succession of heads come and go. It's now going to be taking 3-form entry. Okay, we're getting contributions to the building costs, but I would ask us to consider where we're going to get the teachers from, because it's the teachers that make the school. And the quality of education is at risk with all of this, as I said, rate of change. Maybe squeaky feed it in, but the rate of change. And again, our secondary schools, they're distant. They're in Tadley, they're in Popley, they're miles away. And really, we touched on it with the questions of officers. My personal biggest concern that I'd like us to debate is this flood risk. I'm not a, what is it, hydraulics engineer or whatever they call it, but here we have 3 flood zones within 150 metres of each other. Now that's incredibly precise, the zoning between, so I don't particularly understand that, but there must be some overlap. We've seen that most of the public open space is in zones 2 and 3. In other words, for quite large parts of the year, they could be unwalkable, unusable, which does seem a little bit tongue-in-cheek to call them public open spaces. I mean, we've got to have a special breed of dog with it, you know, that hibernates in the winter or has webbed feet. But it's just one of these things. And we're hearing, and it's interesting to hear about the drainage strategy, SUDS we refer to as sustainable drainage. It will certainly, and I'll take my hat off to the professionals in place, it will address the additional runoff from the development. That's what it's for. It will deal with catching the extra rainwater and putting it in ponds and discharging it. But who's going to address the very fact that we know that this whole area goes underwater, as I said, the photos we've seen and the history that you've heard from local people. So I just can't see these demarcation lines, and in fact the existing strawberry fields, yeah, it doesn't work there, so something went wrong there. I'd like to see, and I hope we would like to see more information, and that brings me on to this last condition 13 that we read in our update paper, and that's more or less saying we need to understand everything about flooding, but after we've said it's okay to build. And I just let's leave a thought with you all that perhaps we ought to see that first before we make any decisions. Thank you.
Members, any of you wish to?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, over the last year we've had Razors Farm coming through for a planning application for 450 houses. We have a site next to it, the Orham, which again is up for 150 houses, and further down Cuffold Farm, which is coming up for 380 houses. Bramley just cannot sustain this, and as well as building new homes, we have to look at the homes and the residents we have got already. Bramley is an awful area for traffic. It's a C road, and as previously been said, the level crossing is down for at least 35 minutes in every hour. The one-stop shop has no parking and causes huge traffic jams at times, and the railway station, a lot of commuters use it, and if you get there after 7:30 in the morning, there's nowhere to park, so people are parking down by the school. But what worries me is the school, because with all these sites that are coming up, children will have to be bused elsewhere. And what was a lovely little school has now turned into a school that people are quite worried about because it is in special measures. So we've got to look at not just about houses, but about amenities. And with these small developments coming up, they are offering nothing in the way of extra school facilities, etc. And I just think, along with the flooding, this is totally unsustainable in Bramley, and I can't support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Potter?
Thank you. Chair, I just wanted to find a mechanism, if I could, just to clarify, and I know Councillor Tomlin raised it, the issue around flooding and the condition 13, you know, the additional condition that's being suggested, and the way we might go about this. And I do take Councillor Tomlin's point in a sense that it seems, and I know it's not entirely unusual, but it is somewhat strange in a sense to be seeking the sort of information which might make our understanding and decision a bit clearer, at least to me, sorry, as a non-expert in the field, seeking that after we'd actually said in principle, yes, the development should go forward. I mean, the reason for the condition suggests information is required prior to the commencement of development as insufficient information was provided. I mean, that's stated as fact. You know, in other words, those who are supposed to provide this information haven't done it, and I would have thought that should be a prerequisite of this type of application, which, you know, by any definition is going to have a complex drainage system on it, really, from what we've witnessed and what we know from the evidence. And it does seem to me that there is an argument for saying a little more time should be spent in just getting that together, so that a lay person like me trying to make I hope, an objective decision could be provided with that before I say yes or no to this application. Now, is that possible? Let me just ask that, sorry, because that would obviously, dare I say it, require this committee deferring this application pending that type of information being provided. And I'm not unhappy about that being done for everybody's benefit. I'll be frank with you. I mean, my original position is that I think the officers have made a substantial and very good case in terms of this development to go forward, but I am concerned about the flooding elements of this, and I would prefer to see some additional information. Can we say that we have an understanding of what we're going to be seeking and how long that would take and how we might go about this?
Certainly it's always before the committee to obviously effectively approve, refuse the application, or obviously defer if it's felt that there simply isn't adequate information before you to come to a view one way or the other. I think to explain the condition that's been worded, effectively what we're saying in the recommendation is that the overall position in terms of flood risk we are satisfied has been met with regards to the flood risk assessment that's been undertaken, the consultation with the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority, and the fact that the built form will certainly be in Zone 1, which is an acceptable area for that to be. In terms of the condition, that is specifically in relation to the open space elements, which are to be provided in Zones 2 and 3, which from a purely flood risk point of view, the National Planning Policy Guidance accepts they can be in those locations as what was termed water compatible uses. The reason for condition 13, however, being constructed in the way that it has is in recognition of the fact that the open space will nevertheless need to be usable, and as Councillor Tomlin points out, there will be times when that area clearly will be subject to saturation and flooding. On that basis, the purpose of the condition is to seek additional information to build on what's already in the drainage strategy. So it's not entirely new information, if you like, but to build on what's in the drainage strategy to try and secure the maximum use of those key areas of the open space, such as the kickabout area, the play area, paths, etc. In essence, so that if certain parts of the open space area are flooded, nevertheless the parts that are most important, if you like, in terms of usability, are nevertheless able to be used during that period. So in essence, we are satisfied that there is enough information to form the recommendation, at least, for that to be conditioned, whereby the final details would be secured at a later stage. I think that's the basis on which the condition has been drawn up.
Sorry, Joe, if I may come back. I mean, Mike explains it far more eloquently than I could ever attempt to, but it does seem to me, I mean, the words that are used in our note, which talks about information is required prior to the commencement of development as insufficient information was provided. I mean, insufficient read inadequate, I guess, and it just seems to me that I'd want to have confidence in the quality of that information because it relates to important matters like the increased risk of flooding, the improvement and protection of water quality, improving habitat and amenity, and of course the very things that Mike talked about, ensuring future maintenance of these in accordance with 103 and 109 of the NPPF. It just seems to me there is a bit of work that could be done on that I haven't seen yet. I'm not sure I'd understand it, but I haven't seen it yet, and I think we should go for that, personally. And I'd have a bit more confidence in understanding exactly how these balances are going to work, and by any definition, you know, we've got a site here that's got substantial public open space provided, but the reality is going to be for X time in the year, and I don't know how long that will be, and it depends on lots of things. There's a climate change discussion going on at very high level at the moment about what the future holds anyway, but in all seriousness, I mean, for large parts of the year, that public open space, which is a key part of this site in a number of ways, both for the residents and others using that, and also for what it contributes to the way water will be shed on the site and all the rest of it, it's just not going to be usable. And I think we need to, I need to understand that a bit better than I do at the present time.
Thank you, Chair. Just hopefully just to explain the reason for the wording of the reason for the condition. That's a fairly recent requirement in that where a condition is a pre-commencement condition, i.e. details to be submitted beforehand, all local authorities now are required to set out why, so that kind of insufficient information covers that point, if you like. The one issue or the one point I would raise in terms of why the recommendation certainly supports a condition is on the basis that in terms of the overall open space requirement, this proposed development provides for a significant excess, if you like, of open space against the minimum standards required, and I suppose that in part informs why we were comfortable that a condition could be included, because in our view, no, we don't know the precise details of how it will be laid out, etc., but we are nevertheless comfortable, if you like, that there, within the space that is provided, there will be an ability to secure that. But I entirely understand the point Councillor Potter's raising in terms of that detail not being within the application at this moment in time.
Any other? Sorry, sorry.
I mean, probably just the wrong thing to say, really. I mean, if I'm swimming against the tide in terms of people's opinions here, you know, I look to colleagues opposite, then they can tell me that, really, end of story, and we'll go for a straight debate on whether we support or reject the recommendation. I was looking to see whether, you know, that did find understanding and favour around the room. If it doesn't, end of story, I won't say any more on it, and I'll make my decision on what I've got, and that's my position.
Any other members? Any comments on that? Councillor Tucker.
I have to say I have a great deal of sympathy for Councillor Potter's comments. I know Bramley pretty well. I represented it for quite a number of years, and I know the problems with the water, and one would really need to be reassured that everything is, I can't say above board, it sounds we're back in ships and things, aren't we, again? Sorry, shouldn't joke about it, but is it possible that we could defer it, and how long would it take for it to be deferred to get the information?
Sorry, I was talking.
Certainly to assist the committee, deferral is clearly an option open to the committee. I think in any situation where a deferral is the view that the committee comes to, if that is the case, there's a couple of things to mention. One is obviously to be very specific as to the information, if you like, that you feel is lacking at the current time, to clearly give the applicant the opportunity to address that. The MPPF is obviously clear about the council and the local planning authority being positive and proactive and seeking to find solutions where problems are there. So I think that's a very important part of it. I think it is also useful if there is then, I suppose, in some ways a debate around, well, is that the only bit of information that is lacking? And from what I've heard so far, it appears to be around how that open space area effectively would work, but also in terms of picking up the localised flooding incidents on the C32 and Strawberry Fields. The one point I would make about Strawberry Fields, of course, is that, as you saw from the site plan that was up before, is actually in flood zones 2 and 3. So that was already in the areas, if you like, that are going to be void of any built development under this proposal. The final thing that I would say on deferral, and I've mentioned this before at previous meetings, is clearly deferring the application. It's just a reality that the developer would obviously still have the opportunity to appeal on the termination. Clearly, we would hope that we'd be able to discuss what the committee's issues are, if you like, in the interim and return it back to committee. But it's nevertheless important that I raise that as an option, if you like, that's open to the developer.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, that's I have to say, certainly would support that. But an additional piece of information, to be honest, while we're at it, and I think it's important for Bramley, and whether this is lacking from planning, because each site has to look after its own, but that blue area there is being fed by the 200 houses from Minson's Lane. So they are going to do their suds and drainage, because we had all that, and it's Grampian conditions, etc., and they're going to clear their own water, and they're going to pass it into that brook. Now, I haven't seen, can we see, what's the impact of the runoff from that on that flooding picture, because that's flooding picture based on Minson's Lane not in existence. It's this general, general build-up of water, and then of course this is all going to trundle off down to Sherford-on-Loddon, and that has massive flooding because it all feeds into Bow Brook. It's the continuity and joined upness of our development, particularly with flooding, and flooding is incredibly emotive. I mean, if you get flooded, it's the pits, obviously, but then you have to live with insurance problems. So it's very, very important. So, I mean, if we're going to go for deferral, I'm quite happy to move for deferral, if that moves us on. So, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Do any other comments? Councillor Taylor.
I don't know very much about flooding or anything, but I do know that when Buckskin was flooded a year or so back, people were throwing their hands up and saying, why on earth was Buckskin built with such inadequate drainage? And I really don't want this to happen again. I just feel that once we've approved this, whatever the conditions are and whatever proposals are going to come forward, we will lose control then, this committee, which has made the decision and will have to stand by that decision and take the flak for that decision, won't have any say. And I'm sure if we do approve it, some scheme will come up which will say, yes, it'll be all right, it'll be fine. But I've got no way of knowing that, and I'm not sure that any of us have, to be honest with you, because I think the implications of having extra housing and all that means to the flood zone, we probably don't even know. But I would just like to know a little bit more. I'd like to have some reassurance that that area that's going to be left as open space isn't going to be a quagmire for most of the year. That would be ghastly for the people living in the houses. And so, I would support deferral, because if we're going to be held responsible for the decision, we need to know a bit more.
Thank you. Any more comments? I've got a mover and a seconder. Right, Councillor Gerson.
Thank you, Chair. I think if we're going to vote on a deferral, I think we need to have it clearly understood what we're expecting to achieve from the deferral and what additional information are we going to be looking and asking for, because there's no point in just deferring it and then coming back to exactly the same, precisely the same set of circumstances.
Yes, I would agree. We ought to have it absolutely take what we are deferring for.
Chairman, if I can assist the committee, as I understand it, the reason for the deferral would be to seek further information in relation to drainage and flood risk on three key issues. One is in terms of the detail of the open space and how that would operate in terms of its usability. The second is in terms of the consideration of localised flooding incidents on the C32 in Strawberry Fields, and whether that has been considered in the flood risk assessment. And the third is the consideration of cumulative impact of other developments in the local area, including Minchin's Lane, which would then be returned to committee.
Does the committee approve? Right, I have a proposal and a seconder for that. Those in favour, raise your hands. Thank you. There's nobody against and no abstentions. Right, that motion is carried. Thank you. Will you...
The application is deferred for the reasons outlined by Mike for the more information on the flooding issues.
Thank you, Patricia. Now we move on to item number 2, which is the watership down in at Free Folk Priors. We'll just give them a minute to go, actually. Right, members. Watership Down. I have speakers in the form of Mrs. Ogden and Dr. Kitchen and Mr. Goodall in support later on, and the officer presenting is Brian Conlon.
Thank you, Chair. This application proposes the erection of a single-storey contemporary flat-roof building on a curved footprint with lightweight glazed facade. It provides 4 guest rooms for an ancillary use to the adjoining pub following demolition of existing buildings. It's been recommended for approval subject to the conditions in the committee report, and there is no update to report other than the site viewing notes.
Thank you. Mrs. Ogden and Mr. Kitchen, Dr. Kitchen, I beg your pardon. You have 4 minutes between you, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
We've lived next to the pub for 16 years, and we have no objection living next to a pub which closes at night, but do not wish to end up living next to an unstaffed hotel which is open 24 hours a day. We believe that the style and position of the bungalows are out of character for what is supposed to be a conservation area. They're out of alignment with the rest of the strip of properties in the street. They'd be visible not only to the neighbours, but to anyone enjoying a walk on the footpath on the other side of the valley. There are no street lights in our lane. The pathways and bungalows would by necessity be lit at night. This would cause light pollution for all the neighbours, especially as the bungalows are sited on the side where most neighbours have their bedrooms. When occupied, the bungalows would all be a source of noise pollution late at night when the guests choose to retire. It should be noted that no staff live in the pub after closing time. There is nobody to respond to alarms when they go off or deal with guests who lock themselves out or who come knocking on doors asking about early breakfasts. The bungalows are intended to increase footfall to the pub. There is no regular public transport. There is a shortage of car parking space. The pub only has 18 car parking spaces, 1 short for the 40 covers that it already has. The 6 full-time staff drive to work and park their cars in the road. There are no plans to increase the amount of parking. When the pub is open, the car park is usually full and patrons have to park in the lane running along the side. The lane ends in the B3400 is next to a blind bend. Well-heeled customers, the sort that would be arriving at the pub with their luggage, are very unlikely to be travelling by bus, as is suggested in the documentation. The business case seems bizarre to us and is incomprehensible to the previous owners of the pub who still live locally. We would say that until the current owner came along, that there was never a need for rooms to be present in order to run a profitable business. The proposed development is out of character for a conservation area, will engender the loss of wildlife habitat, and will cause considerable inconvenience to the neighbours in terms of light and noise pollution, as well as making an already difficult parking situation far worse.
I have three concerns: additional noise nuisance, lack of car parking spaces, impact on the countryside and cottages of these units, and the large terrace. Immediately outside the pub entrance door is a large raised terrace overlooking the lane, which seats 24 or more. All conversations can be heard in my bedrooms. A recent planning application for an air conditioning unit in a chimney facing the cottages was refused because of noise nuisance. The refusal was ignored. I can never open my bedroom windows at night because the unit runs every day from midnight until 8:30 a.m. next day. Noise can be heard in every bedroom. Owners and staff now park in the lane.
1 minute.
Deliveries take place in the lane, causing congestion and noise nuisance. There are no proper foundations to our 17th century cottages. Turning into our garages and forecourts is a problem. The pub does not open until midday. There is an empty car park. The pub is now run by a manager and chef. It is unmanned at night. Outline planning consent for 6 small single-storey units in the pub garden was refused by planners and refused at appeal because of noise nuisance to surrounding properties. The accommodation was extended, including a beer cellar. Later, a conservatory was built. The overflow car park does not work. Transport is not sustainable. No guarantee any families renting rooms can park on the site. Additional noise from people dining and drinking on this wide terrace. The thatched cottages will have noise nuisance on 3 sides of their properties. There's a height difference from my back door to the boundary of number 6 of 1.6 metres. There is an alternative.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for either Mrs. Ogden or Dr. Kitching? No? Thank you both very much. Now, Mr. Goodall, please. Mr. Goodall, you'll have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
This planning application forms an important chapter in what is showing signs of being a pub success story. The Watership Down is bucking the trend of pub closures and decline, but you only have to look at the number of pubs which have closed to appreciate that few rural pubs are thriving. Without the intervention investment of the applicant, the pub would almost certainly be closed. Prior to its purchase, the pub had a succession of failed tenants, had alienated its then limited customer base, and was close to permanent closure. The ship has now been steadied, and the pub has a good food offer, has been refurbished, and has a good but limited accommodation offer. It also functions as a community pub and has locals who drink at the bar and are as welcome as those who dine. The pub now provides employment and is contributing to the local economy. Although the business has shown signs of success, it will always be difficult to sustain a pub of this size in this location without widening its income stream. The pub was here long before any of its neighbours, and the objective of this planning application is to ensure that it's there long after too. Overnight accommodation provides the perfect synergy as it creates a captive market and increases spend at the pub exponentially. The pub can only accommodate around 40 diners at any one time, and therefore it's a fraction of the size of many of its competitors. The proposed building will provide 4 additional guest rooms in a high-quality, bespoke building which has the full support of the Council's Conservation Officer. The originally proposed design was for a traditional structure which had a pitched roof and inevitably greater mass. In response to these specific concerns over impact to the neighbouring property, an alternative design approach was pursued. This removed one of the guest rooms, reduced tree loss, moved the building away from the neighbour's boundary, and reduced its height to just above fence level. We have therefore taken the concerns of neighbours very seriously and have acted accordingly. It is therefore disappointing to read the inaccuracy of the representations made and the location of their authors, including Maidstone. It is also noted that car parking is an issue. Guest rooms provide an obvious synergy, as those who arrive by car to stay overnight are highly likely to dine at the pub, and that principle underpins the business case. Parking standards are designed for new build developments and therefore need to be applied with some caution when looking at extensions to existing uses. Many rural uses such as village shops, churches, schools and pubs have little or no parking, and to seek to rigidly apply new build parking standards would rule out many traditional and established uses. Instead, officers make a professionally informed decision based on their expertise and on-site observations. They have done this and find no objection to the proposed parking arrangements. Motorists are inherently lazy, and if they can't park, they will go elsewhere and take their business with them. Ultimately, the business will fail if customers cannot park, and therefore it's in the applicant's interest to ensure there is adequate parking. There is potentially space for more parking, and therefore, if demand demonstrably exceeds the supply, the applicant will inevitably review his options and consider making further provision, which is also a suggestion that has been made by the parish. I therefore invite you to support the recommendation of your professional officers and approve this planning application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodall. Any questions for Mr. Goodall from members? Councillor Tucker.
Sorry, I may have missed it, but it has been said that it is at the moment unstaffed at night. Is that right?
Overnight, that's correct.
And it won't change if we grant these other ones. There still will not be anybody there.
That's correct, I believe.
Right, thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Goodall? Right. Thank you, Mr. Goodall. Councillor Tilbury. Good evening. You have your 4 minutes. And a
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for coming on the site visit, those of you who did the other day. I mean, a brief history of the pub. With what used to be a very small pub, a fraction of the size of that. I remember going there as a teenager, and it was one of those pubs you walked in the door and it just went silent because someone from outside the village had turned up, all the way from Overton. Well, in fact, it was three of us on a motorbike, and probably didn't help. But the point is, it was very small. It's grown quite a lot. The area to the left in that picture is all an extension on there. Since then, it's had a conservatory, which has actually made the pub. It was thriving throughout most of my lifetime. The only reason it went downhill, I mean, the previous landlord, the one I see as the previous landlord, wasn't trying to sell it. He was approached by Punch Taverns, who took it over and put in a succession of landlords who ran the business into the ground. Not really their fault. It's Punch Taverns' business model. That's what they seem to do. Since then, it's now been taken over, and they've gone for a different sort of approach to marketing the pub, and it's obviously much more upmarket, as you can see. And obviously, they're trying to turn it into a small motel, which was tried before. The problem with that is obviously it is still quite busy, and there just isn't enough car parking. And parking has always been a problem with this. And for officers to say that, well, you know, people, it's self-enforcing, people won't park there. Well, they do. They just park in front of their neighbours' drives and cause all sorts of problems. And this has been a constant source of complaint to me as a councillor since I became a councillor in 2002. And nothing has changed there. Now, there seems to be some confusion of the number of spaces, and part of the problem is the house behind there, which if you look on the plan, on the site location plan, it shows number 11. Well, that's actually where the former landlord lives, and his wife lived there, who ran that. And of course, when they sold the property, they retained part of that to allow themselves access to their large garden on there. Well, that took out about 3 of the spaces, which when you visit the site, you'll see they're still marked on the ground, but clearly you can't park in them. So the amount of parking isn't even what it used to be when there was a problem before. So since then, as I say, the landlord effectively runs it now. Doesn't live on site. He's renting the rooms out as for anyone there. As I say, there are no staff on site, which is rather unusual, and now they're going to increase it by another 4 places on there. Now, we want to, do these places to thrive, but it should not be at the expense of the existing residents who've, you know, seen this grow from over many years. Certainly Mrs. Ogden was living there when it was a very small pub, so she's seen this change over her lifetime from being a very small, quiet country pub to quite a bit, what can be a very busy pub. I mean, they used to run beer festivals there, and, you know, and it was quite successful there, and no one wants to stop that. But if it's going to have an impact on people, then we've got to do our best to ameliorate that impact, and providing a reasonable number of car parking spaces has got to be part of that. The officers clearly stated it should have 26, and that's probably about least what it needs. But it's suggesting here the applicant saying there's 22, but the only way I can see that, and it is referred to in the report, that they can park up the middle between the other cars there. Well, if you've seen the site, that's actually, it's not marked out that way, and it actually isn't very practical. It's not actually that big. You know, so something needs to be done, and it needs to be done in such a way that you can actually achieve that there. Well, you can see from there, for the extension on the side there, you can't park there. You've still got to have access to get into number 11 as well. So, you know, the car parking is actually reduced. I think that's the problem here. It's not a case if you're in a situation where you couldn't provide more parking, because as you can see from the garden, there is actually loads of room. So they are able to improve the parking in the area so they don't impact on their immediate neighbours. And I don't think that's too much for any residents or anyone to ask. It's not, you know, some places they're in a narrow street, there just isn't any way of doing it, they were never built for cars. Well, the Watership Down is fortunate, it has a very large area of land, so it's perfectly able to do that. And if you want to expand the business, you know, and you can guarantee people who are going to stay in for a hotel accommodation are going to drive up in a car. I mean, the locals may walk to the pub and stagger home, but people who are going there to stay are going to turn up in a car. They got suitcases and all that.
Please?
So, yeah, thank you very much. So, that's about all I've got to say.
Thank you, Ian. Members, any questions for Councillor Tilbury? No? Thank you. Questions to officers. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps we could ask the Highways and Parking for an explanation of this slightly bipolar sort of polarised debate about there is enough spaces, there aren't enough spaces, and the sensibility of parking on the roads.
Looking at the planning history for this site, I've identified that when the conservatory was considered, at that time there was a detailed transport statement that looked into parking demands of the public house itself. At that time they actually enlarged the car park, and there was a condition to have 18 parking spaces. Subsequently we had the latter applications for the site to the south, and when the garage for that was consented, plans provided with that application also showed the retention of 18 spaces, albeit that the extent of the car park was altered once more, with the extent of the hard surfacing being extended to the southwest, although of course there is still the need to preserve the corridor for vehicles from that site to make their way through the car park. The applicant has stated that the car park provides 22 spaces. However, in terms of marked out bays, I think it is closer to 19. Taking into account, though, the area between spaces and between different parts of the car park, I could see that there's some potential for additional cars to park at peak times, which may result in some additional manoeuvres getting out of certain spaces, but nonetheless it would appear reasonable that circa 22 spaces could fit within that space. Therefore, with the parking standards looking at one space per guest room, takes us from the 18 that was established previously to the 22 that is now stated. The other factor is that by virtue of the historical nature of the conservation area which the site sits in, the actual adjacent streets are constrained, so that's really where they limit the potential for additional parking to take place on the surrounding streets
questions? Councillor Potter.
Chairman, I just want to be entirely clear about the analysis and the calculation, really, because the highway officer, I think, talks in terms of total expectation. I don't think that's a requirement, but total expectation, 26 spaces compared with the stated 22 spaces within the existing car park. And I know there's going to be peaks and troughs on this. I mean, not all the residential accommodation would be occupied 100% anyway, really. But in terms of that 26 spaces, that is saying on that calculation, and when all the accommodation units are occupied, 26 would be the number of spaces required, but the best that can ever be provided on the existing provision is 22. Is that right?
The 26 comes about if one is to apply the eating and dining areas associated with the public house and the guest rooms, all 7 of them, against our parking standard. Thereby, given that our standards are a maximum, that's a maximum figure, assuming that the occupation of the guest rooms essentially is independent to the use of the eating and drinking spaces associated with the public house. But technically, if that was to occur and the guest rooms were fully occupied, and then the eating and dining space was fully occupied by another set of customers, then the parking standards would suggest that that could lead to a maximum of the 26 spaces, which would go beyond the 22 that is likely within the car park, but would probably be balance picked up by the bit of parking, 4 or 5 spaces you tend to see on the adjacent street. I think it would be difficult for the adjacent streets to accommodate any more.
Any other questions? Councillor Taylor.
Could I ask the planning officers, supposing that we sort of in principle agree that the actual building would be fine, would it be a minor amendment to ask that parking for, say, half a dozen more spaces were opened up, or would that be a major alteration that would require a whole new application?
Yeah, that would, given what the application seeks permission for, any change to the any increase in provision of parking would ultimately result in an engineering operation into further area that's currently, I think, marked as grass and bushes and shrubs to the south of the actual proposed building. It may well have wider impacts and would obviously need to be assessed cumulatively with everything, which the non-material amendment procedure wouldn't allow. So it would have to be outside of this application or part of a wider application.
Any more questions? No? Oh, it's Councillor Tomlin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Do we have any take, is it of any relevance to anywhere that there is nobody on site, like a sort of hotel with nobody there? Is that anything that we can make comment on?
I don't think so. I don't think it's relevant to the planning. Right. No more questions. Let's move to debate and let's have a proposal or something from somebody. Councillor.
I'll have a go if I may, Chair. I mean, I went on the site visit and having regard to what I saw and what I know has been the history of this little that I know, in terms of the amendments that have been made. I mean, the proposal now being a single-storey building which is going to be dug into the slope of the site, and as the officer says, you know, sitting mainly below the fence line of the neighbouring property to the north and away from further boundaries. And I can't see on that basis it would cause significant impact to the amenities of residents in the near vicinity. I see the car parking as a potential problem, but I would have thought that this was a straightforward business analysis. I think I heard Mr. Goodall say in terms of supply and demand. I mean, if they find that in simple terms, they're turning business away because people turn up and say, well, I would have used it, but I couldn't park, and therefore I'll go somewhere else. That isn't going to go on for very long because they want to make this a going concern, and they're making it a going concern. So I think that solution is in their hands, and they'll come back with a supplementary planning application for something in terms of additional car parking spaces in the area we think they should go. On that basis, Chair, I support the officer's recommendation, and I'd move approval.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Councillor Westbrook, Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's reasonable to assume that if all the rooms were occupied, then most of those people would in fact be eating in the restaurant. So I'm not sure that one need necessarily consider that all the restaurant is going to be occupied by additional people to the people who are actually using the rooms. So I think on that basis, I support what Councillor Potter says, and I'm happy to second the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook, no? Right, I have a proposer and a seconder for approval. Those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous, I think. Would you like to, Brian, give us the conditions?
Thank you, Chairman. To confirm, the item has been approved subject to the conditions listed in the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to Sandham House, Pound Lane, Berkeley. And speaking on this, do we have some speakers? Yes, for the Parish Council, Maggie North. Objectors, Tony Garland and Leon Price. And in support, Mr. Lee Battersby. And I don't think we have any ward councillors. We start off with Maggie North, and Patricia Logie will present it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application, full planning application, for residential development of 6 numbered dwellings and the erection of a replacement garage and store to Sandham House. There is an update, page 8 of your update papers. We had a late request in relation to trees, which hasn't been able to be resolved, but as the tree concerned was shown to be removed and was found to be acceptable as removed from our tree officer, we're not suggesting any additional conditions, but suggest an informative that best endeavours be used to retain the tree that was shown to be removed. Also, the comments from the conservation officer with no objection to the amended plans was missed off, so that's just to confirm the conservation have no objection to the amended plans. And there is an edit to condition 6 on page 95 of the printed papers, and in the reason we need to add residential amenity, and the reason for this is discussed in the printed papers in paragraph 3 on page 91.
Thank you, Patricia. Right. Ms. North, you will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
This application has been brought before you because it is outside of the settlement boundary and because it has been opposed by so many residents. The settlement boundary is clearly drawn to exclude the rearmost garden areas of the large properties along both Pound Lane and Harts Lane to prevent the encroachment of residential development into the countryside. What is being proposed in this application is building in the countryside. As you saw on your site visit, we are a small village with few amenities. We are very fortunate to have a Grade 1 listed building a stone's throw from the proposed development. By Grade 1, I mean it is in the same bracket as Blenheim Palace, Tower Bridge and Highclere Castle, and is therefore regarded by English Heritage as a building of exceptional interest and rarity. The reason I mention this is because according to the National Planning Policy Framework, you should be conserving the natural environment and heritage assets. If a Grade 1 listed building in a rural location is not a heritage asset, then what is? My point being that the land where the development is proposed is land which should be protected in its own right as open countryside, and if allowed, it will give carte blanche to all the development outside of the settlement boundary, therefore negatively impacting on our heritage asset and countryside. Secondly, I'd like to tackle the argument of economic sustainability of the proposal. Of course, the construction construction phase would create a number of jobs, but so would any other development, be it a house in Basingstoke or one in the middle of a stone circle at Stonehenge. What we are concerned with is the existing employment of the local farmers who only last Friday were driving their cows on foot down Pound Lane, and will provide ongoing employment for generations, but will undoubtedly be disrupted from carrying out their business during the construction phase and also with the additional traffic that the development will generate. According to your own planning officer's report, there is non-compliance with Safe Policy C3. Also, with regard to environmental sustainability, the site is not suitable when measured in terms of sustainable transport modes, as quoted by your planning officers. With regard to the impact on the area and design, the proposal is not in keeping with other houses found on the lane and adjoining Harts Lane, which are surrounded by large gardens. The density of the proposed houses will negatively impact on many neighbours who turned up in force at the Parish Council meeting to oppose the development. It is because of the low density character of the area that nearby residential properties have enjoyed peace and privacy for many decades. The density in this application is more akin to an urban context and appears cramped in this more rural location. It is considered that the development proposed would not be reflected of the pattern of development in the locality. With regards to highways, the transport statement that has been provided to support the application has models, obviously, that can help prove that it needs supporting. However, it does not factor in human nature or reality. We are told that the number of cars will increase on Pound Lane by 50%. In fact, we believe this is going to be a lot more, and this is indicated by the newest development in the adjacent Laurel Bank, which is very similar to this one. It is also 6 properties. And having done a quick count of the number of permanent vehicles that are there are 16 vehicles between the houses. One property owns 4 cars between 2 people. This is a reality. Taking a 2-person household in Laurel Bank, the minimum number of car movements is 7 daily. However, often there are more than double that. This caters for dog walker, cleaner, groceries, parcel deliveries, and guests. We cannot support this application, and we ask you to reject it.
Thank you very much, Mr. North. Members, any questions for Ms. North?
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Potter?
Hello. Could I just clarify the references to the settlement policy boundary? I mean, the information I think we have suggests that the access to the site is within the SPB, whereas the rest of the site is not. Do you concur with that or disagree with that?
The entrance is within the settlement boundary. However, the whole development, or the majority, I expect the planners can confirm this, is outside of the settlement boundary. Is that correct?
That is correct, apparently. Any more questions for Ms. North? No? Thank you, Ms. North. Next, please, can I have Tony Garland and Leon Price? You're unaccompanied, obviously. Thank you.
Good evening, all. Many thanks for letting me attend today and provide feedback from the people of the village that have already made their objections to this proposed development known. One of the neighbours, Tony Garland, had intended to come and speak with you all, but unfortunately he's away on a holiday that he had previously booked, so couldn't make this date. I'll start with the settlement boundary policy, as that is the leading argument we have for objections towards this. Settlement policy boundary is the dividing line or boundary between areas of built-up urban development, also known as the settlement, and non-urban or rural development, the open countryside. This has been drawn up to protect the village from this kind of development, and it should be used to make a judgment rather than ignored by those that find it inconvenience of their plans to build there. The piece of land is recognised brownfield. It is still, however, protected from development by the SPB in place. In principle, as this development does not benefit the community's facilities, it is not a school, a community hall, a healthcare or religious building. If it was any of these things, it should rightly invite your consideration of being justified to be built outside of the settlement boundary, but it's not. It is simply a residential development in the wrong place. As a village, we are not adverse to change, and we will welcome any new developments that are well considered and are in favour of sustainable development within the settlement boundary of our village. We wish to provide much needed housing within the borough. However, as you know, this proposed development is largely outside of the recognised settlement boundary, and this is a very valid reason why it should not be considered for your approval. Over the years, there have been a number of planning applications within Berkeley, which have all been purely rejected on the fact they're based outside of our local settlement boundary. Should you now choose to disregard this and approve the application, considering it is outside, I have no doubt that some form of financial compensation will be sought from the council by those members of the village whose applications you have already refused at this point. We're looking to you for some consistency. The agent states the settlement policy boundary is due for review and amendment. This is a future event. It has not yet occurred, and it would be incorrect for you to make a decision on what the settlement policy boundary may be in future, rather than assess the appraisal on the settlement policy boundary as it stands today. The agent's also using the adjacent development at Laurel Bank as a good reason why you should simply say yes and approve it. Therefore, in one single approval, you will be granting every developer out there to jump on Berkeley and urbanise all the surrounding large gardens and paddocks situated outside the settlement policy boundary. In a word, you will no longer be protecting our rural village, as you, our borough council, should be.
1 minute.
There were mention of traffic concerns. I believe it was acknowledged that public transport could be used to reduce the traffic movement from the dwellings. The reality of this statement is if any of the residents need to be somewhere before 9 a.m, there is no public transport available. And if they wish to return home after 3 p.m, there is no public transport available. The buses that used to serve our village have been cut, and it stands that the first bus, 7A, leaves Berkeley at 9 a.m, returning to the village at 2:43. But if you take the 2:43 stop, it's actually stopping in a different village, and you then have a 30-minute aerobic walk in order to get you back to where you should be. So I do believe that that argument put forward of it being sustainable because of the traffic modes is fictional. I thank you all for your time this evening and your considerations with regards to this, and many thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor.
I'm not sure whether I need to ask her or our officers if we could perhaps on the map have it shown where the SPB is exactly. I think it would be really helpful.
Any more questions or explanations? Right, thank you very much indeed. Right, next, Mr. Lee Battersby, please. That's fine.
Chairman, good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Alan Jones, and I'm a Chartered Town Planner. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the Planning Officer on her report. I agree with it. It's a very balanced report, and it comes, in my view, to the right conclusion. For those reasons, I won't repeat it in detail, nor will I repeat any chunks of my design and access statement which go into the same sort of areas. The planning officer says in her report, and I quote, that there is a serious and significant 5-year land supply shortage, unquote. As a result, the adopted local plan cannot be considered up to date. The emerging local plan cannot be afforded much weight because it's emerging. But let's leave that to one side for the moment, because, Chairman, you've heard from the last two speakers quite a lot about the settlement boundary, and so I will start with that. The adopted local plan policy D5 says that residential development which contributes to the social, economic and environmental well-being will be permitted within some settlement boundaries, including Burghclere. This site straddles the settlement boundary, as you've heard. The site is not part of the curtilage of Sandham House, but it is garden, and that's acknowledged by the planning officer. And the local plan does not contain any policies which resist development of garden land. The settlement boundary for Burghclere, more importantly, is in fact out of date. And if it were to be reviewed, as it will be, I think anyone looking at that plan would conclude, even before you get to the issue of land supply, that this site would be included in the settlement boundary. It makes sense that it should be, and the edges of the settlement are actually Pound Lane and Harts Lane. So turning then to the elephant in the room, which is the 5-year housing land supply, once you accept that there is a serious problem, then the presumption in favour of sustainable development must apply, and planning permission should be given unless there are significant or demonstrable reasons why not in terms of harm. There is no harm which outweighs the benefits of this scheme. The benefits are that it brings 6 new houses, much needed in order to satisfy your housing land supply. 2 of them are social houses. And in addition to that, it's commodious, it's well placed, it's well designed, and it relates very well to the adjoining development, as you can see from the plan on screen. In conclusion, and this is dealt with more fully in the planning officer's report, the questions are, is it sustainable? The answer is yes, it is. And does it cause significant and demonstrable harm that outweighs its benefits? And the answer to that is no, it does not. On that basis, I respectfully request, Chairman, that the committee grants planning permission. There's just about 53 seconds left.
Okay, I'd just like to make a couple of points. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. On a couple of points raised. One was with regard to the Sandham Memorial, which is to the west of the site. Those of you who came on the planning meeting or on the planning meeting will see that actually very difficult to see the Sandham Memorial from the entrance to Sandham House site, and certainly almost completely impossible to see it from once inside the site. Of all the years I've been dealing with sites, this is probably the one site which is completely bounded by trees on all parts and is actually self-contained. Reference was made to the fact of it being a large area of public space, but other than by looking at it on Google Maps, you'd never know that it was a large area of open space until you're actually standing on the site itself. I think, as with a number of housing developments in the local area, that the addition of houses and householders adds to services. Yeah, adds to services and all the supportive services in the village, of which the parish have obviously made great capital in the past with regard to the support of the public house. And I would like the planning committee to support our application. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do we have any questions for Mr. Jones and Mr. Battersby? No? Thank you both very much. Members, questions to officers? Do I have any? Going to right, debate. Do I have any proposals or seconders or? Councillor Taylor.
Just to start off really, in an ideal world, in my ideal world, this would remain as a nice large garden attached to a nice large house. But obviously that's not a planning consideration at all. And it's secluded, and its density is actually looks like as if it's less than that of Laurel Bank. And we obviously have to reluctantly take the point about the 5-year housing land supply. And so in the absence of any reason to refuse, I would have to agree with the officer's recommendation.
Are you proposing?
I will move that, yes.
Thank you. You will second it. Right, I have a proposer and a seconder for approval. Those in favour will raise your hands, please. Those abstaining? Those against? That's... Patricia, will you...
So therefore the application is approved as conditioned on the written papers with the amendment to condition 6 and the addition of a tree informative.
Thank you. We now move to Bury Down, Green Lane, Stratfield Say. I have speakers in the form of Mrs. Charlotte Toosey and Mr. Ian Laster, and the ward councillor, Councillor Gardner, and Councillor Tucker. You're also a ward councillor. And Brian, are you going to propose it?
Thank you, Chairman. The final item, item 4, is relates to the erection of a single 4-bedroom detached dwelling with a separate detached double garage and associated parking. The application would result in the removal of all existing outbuildings on the application site to make way for the proposed dwelling. It is being recommended for refusal for the reasons outlined in the committee report. With regard to the update, I can summarise that there was a discrepancy identified in the calculations provided by the officer. To confirm, there is a net reduction in built form by 35 square metres. However, the application is being recommended for refusal not on numerical grounds but on inappropriate size and scale in relation to the plot, along with the other 2 reasons for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Toosey and Mr. Laster, you have 4 minutes between you, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members, and thank you so much for your time. I'd also like to thank those members who came to the site visit last Friday, and I hope it gave you a feeling of the location. Our family have been renting on the Stratfield Say estate since 2006. We have 3 children. My husband Giles and I are involved in many local activities, from cricket and rugby clubs to church flowers and other community events. We have worked very closely with our architect in order to conceive a sensitive home for the location which will blend into the surrounding area. The recreation ground and pavilion are just across the road. It is very close to the Iron Duke Public House, and the Village Hall on New Street offers various classes and organised events which we regularly attend and assist at. The houses on Green Lane are of a mixed variety, and the order that their varied houses sit in the road isn't important. In fact, Bury Down is now the only bungalow, after Greenfields, which is the next door house, has just raised their roofline to provide new dormer windows at the front as well as a 2-storey gabled end at the back. Therefore, we believe that a 1.5-storey frontage with single-storey side additions will look very attractive, and with the vast oak trees to the east, the eye will gently be guided to the woods beyond. We intend to extend the care in the design by using high-quality materials, and the silvering of the locally sourced sustainable wood cladding is intended to impose as little as possible on the surrounding countryside and woodland. Members may like to know that the house has been designed to lifetime home standards in order to accommodate us in old age. There is also a locally supported environmental benefit in the removal of all the unsightly and inappropriate outbuildings. The demolition of these, together with all the existing hardstanding, will result in a reduction in the overall built area. We have absolutely no objections, and so I hope that you will be happy to support this proposal for our new home. Thank you.
Thank you for the update report this evening, which clarifies the concerns that I expressed at the viewing, so thank you for that. This is a rural brownfield site, so it can be considered under Safe Policy D9, which allows exceptions in the countryside. However, I don't want to rely too much on the SAVE policies because they are out of date and cannot be given as much weight as they once had. Instead, national planning guidance must take precedence with its presumption in favour of sustainable development. Significantly, national guidance does not refer to location when assessing sustainability. It does caution against isolated dwellings, but I don't regard this part of Stratford Say to be isolated. I acknowledge that anyone living here will primarily use a private car for most journeys, but that cannot be the be-all and end-all of whether a particular development is right. Your officers refer to the reasons for refusal of Herriot's Farm, which was considered to be an unsustainable location, but I would refer you to the nearby development at the old stores at West End Green, which you may have passed on Friday. That site is less well located to the facilities in Stratford Say, but the unsustainable location did not stop permission being granted, and that development is now very successfully completed. Turning to the emerging local plan, there is a move towards greater flexibility for dwellings in the countryside.
Half a minute.
And policy SS6E has already been given weight, such that at least 7 new rural dwellings have been approved as exceptions, including one at your last meeting. In terms of overdevelopment and the lack of a 10-metre depth rear garden, I don't agree with your officer's assessment. In the light of the corrected figures, the dwelling would occupy 28% of the site area, not 41%. And to my eye, it doesn't appear too much on this very wide plot of land. The garden area would extend to 291 square metres, which is generous and nearly 5 times the minimum area recommended in the guidance quoted in the report. 10-metre garden depth is recommended in order to ensure privacy and minimum back-to-back separation of 20 metres, but that won't be an issue here, as the dwelling would overlook a huge arable field.
Can you come to a conclusion, please?
Finally, the report confirms that none of the constituencies has objected to the proposal. There are no third-party objections, and there are at least 7 letters of support. My clients are willing to enter into Section 106 agreement to fund nearby improvements to the recreation ground, so I ask you to resolve to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members, for Mrs. Toosey or Mr. Lassiter? Councillor Potter.
Hello. I mean, I know a couple of references have already been made, but I just want to be absolutely clear, if I may, in terms of my figures that I've got now. I mean, I know we can see the footprint on the plans you provided, but in terms of the new dwelling, we are talking about 216 square metres, you know, a dwelling approaching something like 2,000 square feet. That's what we're actually looking at, is it? Is that right? Okay. And sorry, can you just remind me, what did you say, perhaps together with the parking area and paths, that occupied as a percentage of the whole site? Was it 28% of it? Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. Just clarification, really. I heard mentioned just now, you mentioned about some contributions. I think it says in the report that there was an absence of a legal agreement securing contributions. So is that a contradiction? I'm not quite sure whether, because it says towards open space and play provision. Just to...
Jeff, I can just hope you help with that. Is on the basis that the application is being recommended for refusal, and on that basis there wouldn't be a Section 106. If the recommendation was for approval, then the applicant would have been invited to enter into a Section 106 agreement.
Thank you. Any more questions? Right, thank you both very much. Any questions for officers, members? Oh, sorry, local councillor. Councillor Gardner, my apologies, Councillor Gardner.
Nothing to apologise for, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members. I'd like to say that this application solves all the borough's housing problems. Obviously it doesn't, but it does solve the applicants. The officer has reviewed this application against set criteria as to the overdevelopment of the site and sustainability, and in his view the application fails and is therefore recommended for refusal. Normally I would have agreed with this decision. However, I reviewed the application, as has the parish council. We have agreed that this is a marginal decision. The parish council raised no objection to the application, although they did express concerns about possible overdevelopment of the site. Looking at the plans, from what we've heard already, the plot is linear with restricted depth, but there does appear to have adequate green space around the proposed house, and with open fields at the rear does not appear cramped, as the viewing will have confirmed. I do not think that this reason for refusal can be justified. Stratfield Say is a scattered rural community, but it is a community. The proposed development is as central as it can be to the village hall, recreation ground, the local pub, and, although it's limited, there is a bus route. While it can be argued that sustainability is marginal by urban standards, and that the use of private transport is a necessity, this is true of many areas of the borough, and small developments such as this will maintain the community's sustainability. I therefore think that this reason for refusal can also be justified. The retention of the existing bungalow I consider is positive, as there is a need for such residential units in Stratfield Say. The third reason for refusal I think has been covered and it will now fall. So I consider that the proposed development will have a positive impact on the community, and I therefore request the committee to approve the application.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for Councillor Gardner? No? Thank you very much, Roger. Councillor Tucker, do you wish to speak now or debate? Whatever you like. Questions to officers. Thank you, Councillor Bound.
Could I ask the officers, do you agree that the footprint of the building is 28%? Because looking at my plan, it looks to be more than 28%, but...
Thanks, Councillor. Taking into account the footprint and the proposed hard surfacing, we've calculated the area of coverage to be nearer 40%. Again, this is approximate, taking into account footpaths. It depends whether we're talking about the footprint of the house or footprint of the house and hard standing. Okay, including hard standing, we equate it to be more nearer 40%.
So would you say the house is 28%?
The calculation of the house as a percentage, a numerical percentage of the site area hasn't been calculated in the committee report, just the square meterage of the development as a footprint.
Any more questions? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I may have misheard something when Councillor Westbrook asked about the absence of a legal agreement. Did I understand the response to be that because it was because it was being recommended for refusal, it wasn't necessary to have a legal agreement? Does that mean that if it were to be approved, it would be necessary to have a legal agreement?
In short, yes. So if the recommendation had been for approval, i.e. that the other two reasons hadn't been in place, then it would have been a recommendation subject to a legal agreement being required. On the basis that it was being recommended for refusal, obviously the applicant hasn't been invited to enter into that Section 106 agreement at this time, and therefore the reason for refusal on that was there as well.
Sorry, does that mean that if we were to approve it, there would be a requirement for a legal agreement? Yeah, okay.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Potter.
Bit of tautology on my part, I'm sure, but I must admit we probably need to look at the wording on occasions. I mean, I find there's an ambiguity, isn't it? Because the last sentence on 115 and 190 actually says, furthermore, the absence of a legal agreement securing contributions towards the delivery of an additional open space and play provision generates a further reason for refusal. Well, by definition, because it's recommended for refusal, the applicant's not going to enter into the 106 in the first place. So, I mean, this is going around a bit of a circle, isn't it? Why would I bother with a legal agreement if they're telling me it's going to be refused, but then that is argued as a reason for refusal? I think we need to look at that afresh, don't we, really?
I agree with you, Councillor. Any more? Councillor Boyer.
Thank you, Chairman. The applicants just sat here that if it was approved, they agreed to do a legal agreement.
Yep. Yes, that's correct. Any more questions? Councillor Potter. Right, we're going to debate now. Councillor Tucker, do you wish to?
Yes, I'll have a go now. Councillor Gardner has actually covered a large amount, for which I'm very grateful. But I'd just like to remind you the reason why we have brought it to committee and why we went to view it, because there are so many things that are possible points of view that sort of thing. For instance, is the area sustainable? Well, we've been into this, I don't know how many times. Just walk up the road and you've got the, gosh, my brain's gone. No, well, that is one, yes. No, on the other side of the road is the area for recreation. Thank you. Sorry, I've had it already. And also, when you have the crossroads, you go down and there's the village hall. So, and you've heard that we do have a bus that comes down from Reading, okay, once, but it does come down and it does allow people to get a chance to go out. So it is pretty sustainable from that point of view. It is admitted also in the a report that that piece of land could be called a brownfield site. I think that's on page 109. There have not been any specific objections, and including our landscape officer had no objections, which I would have thought he probably would have done if he felt that it was too cramped and that it should have more land with it. So therefore, is it an overdevelopment? It's very questionable, I would say. With regard to the 5-year land supply, we all know we need that even every one is very nice, that it has already been mentioned that on the village shop, if you remember, we granted 4 houses. I wasn't unhappy about that. I thought it should only be 2. But the argument was that we are short of houses. 5-year land supply, we have to have as many as we possibly can. So they were built and are looking actually quite smart, I have to admit. So 1 more house in this area, I think the argument goes in its favour. So I leave it up to you, members. I did take you out to the site, you've seen it, and as you can see and have heard, there are pros and cons, but these people would very much like to stay in the village, and as you have heard, they do contribute a lot to the village themselves. Thank you.
Councillor Porter?
Well, I guess in my case, why break the habit of a lifetime? And I've got a record, I guess, for supporting, and I find myself always going against officers who I know have this invidious position when it comes to reports like this. I find this element of the MPPF probably the most contradictory, even in its own wording, really, because we get this sort of bizarre situation where, you know, where this exceptional in the sense it was going to be an agricultural worker, you know, we could perhaps give it approval. It still wouldn't be sustainable, but, you know, it's okay because it's an agricultural worker. Whereas in this situation, we're advised, obviously, it should be something different. But I would want this to be approved. I say it on the basis that I had original reservations about the footprint. It seemed in simple terms to me to be too large a property for the plot that it was being put on. But in terms of some of the calculations that I've seen, my objections fall in that regard. And to be frank, really, I thought about it subjectively as well. No, objectively, I hope. I mean, if people say, I want a larger property, albeit on a limited plot, and I'm prepared not to have quite such a big garden as I might, then that's a choice. And it seems to me that doesn't in itself necessarily classify as overdevelopment in that regard. I think it is sustainable. I mean, I think Councillor Taylor said a while ago when we were looking at other sites, I mean, if you were to try and find a truly rural, sustainable site in all senses of the word, especially for individual dwellings within hamlets and all the rest of it, you'd struggle, I think, really. It just isn't possible. But in the real world, this is going to meet a need and will free up another property, and as Councillor Tucker has said, is part of the hub of this part of the village in any case. And on that basis, and I know the problem this creates for us in terms of further consultation and the like, but consistent with what I've nearly always said on these things, I'd say that I would want this application approved. I move that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, followed by Councillor Bowyer.
I fundamentally, yes, I do agree with what Councillor Potter has just said. I think it is a large building on a fairly small plot, But I think that's mitigated by the open farmland that's over the back of it, which is very attractive. And I think that double-storey glazed area would be lovely, overlooking the farmland. So I don't think, in that respect, it's overworked. And I think the adverse impacts of this development in terms of the character of the surrounding countryside are relatively minor, and I don't think they outweigh the requirement to abide by paragraph 14 of the MPPF, which is to go in favour of sustainable development. So for those reasons, I would second Councillor Potter's move.
Thank you. Councillor Bowyer. Right. Thank you. We're just going to summarise the reasons.
Hopefully, Chair, just to assist the committee in terms of what I understand to be the reasons for approval, apologies, before a vote is taken, which would, I assume would be that the committee considers that the site is not in an isolated location with regards to what's, if you like, the counter of what's set out in the report, that the development would be in keeping with the character of the area as a whole. A question, I suppose, really, would that include in terms of having considered the benefits of removal of the existing buildings as part of that balance and approval? And as I understand it, they are the main reasons for approval, effectively, that the committee were discussing.
Developer contribution. That sound right to you, members? Right, we have a proposer and a seconder for approval. Those in favour, please raise your hands. Those against? Abstain? Thank you. That motion is carried then. And conditions, please.
Okay, to summarise then, the item is approved subject to the completion of a legal agreement and planning conditions, which would include approved plans, time limit, materials to be specified, landscaping, which would need to include means of enclosure and hard surfacing, specific highway conditions including parking and turning, as stated in consultation responses, along with specific conditions relating to details of foul water drainage on site, which would preferably be a package treatment given the lack of mains foul drainage, construction traffic, environmental health requirements for contamination because it's a residential use on an existing site, and construction hours and delivery hours because of its location.
Thank you, Brian. Right. Members, we now move to paper C, which is Appeals Decisions Quarterly Summary Report, which Mike Townsend is going to give us, and there are in fact 2 quarters to report. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, my apologies to the committee for the fact that it is 2 quarterly reports. So just to confirm, it is actually covering the period of the 6-month period of May through to October 2015. There are a couple of points to bring to members' attention. One in relation to some of the specific appeal decisions, which I'll just reflect on in a moment in Appendix A. But in bringing forward the quarterly appeal reports, we are required to confirm any cost settlements that have been actually agreed during that period. So, as you're aware, we'll often have cost decisions made against the council and sometimes in favour of the council, but it's actually the timing of the cost settlement within that period of May to October that we are now reporting in this paper. They are set out at paragraph 1.5 and 1.6 of the report. And just to run through what those effectively relate to, the first is in relation to the Caesars Way Whitchurch application, which, as you may recall, members considered. It was an application for 36 dwellings, refused on a number of reasons, one of which was in relation to the application being premature ahead of the neighbourhood plan for Whitchurch at that time coming forward. The appeal was allowed for reasons reported previously, but in effect the inspector awarded costs against the council, or partial awards of costs, on the issue of prematurity only, and effectively that cost settlement has now been finalised at £20,000 as recorded at paragraph 1.5. The second, Chairman, is in relation to the Worting Farm appeal. Again, an application of costs was made by the developer at that public inquiry. The inspector only supported a partial award of costs again, because the inspector found that the council's evidence was, if you like, substantial, and the reasons for refusal were reasonable on most parts, except in relation to the highway safety impact. And the final cost settlement of that has now also been settled within the reporting period at £53,750, as set out at paragraph 1.6. Chairman, there's one additional verbal update to this paper which I can also provide. The reason for it not being in the report is that unfortunately the settlement occurred on the 2nd of November, so just outside of this reporting period. But I can also confirm verbally that the council has now also settled the Razors Farm costs, which again was a full award of costs, so not partial, a full award of costs, and that settlement has now been set out at £194,000. In terms of it being that full award. As I say, that is part of the reporting process that we bring back to members in terms of cost settlements. Chairman, then I was just going to reflect on a couple of the appeal decisions in Appendix A. Obviously, the Bullington Cross appeal was withdrawn following the, in particular, the government guidance issued about onshore wind farms. I can confirm that we've had no further communication with the developer in that sense, so we assume that there's no further works being progressed on that basis. So obviously that appeal was withdrawn, and nothing more to be done. The other Appendix A I wanted to draw to members' attention was the Riverside View application. Members may recall this was the application in Old Basing, recommended for refusal and refused by committee. Effectively, this was one where when we've been talking about the planning balance of whether there are adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits, on this occasion we were able to defend that position on the Old Basing case, specifically around issues such as conservation impact and, as it happens, flood risk, because it was in the flood zone, along with a whole host of other reasons for refusal. I think there were 10 in total, including the design of the building, etc. So it does, I suppose, demonstrate that housing supply in itself does not always mean that things have to be approved, albeit that clearly the tests are there, and on occasions there are good grounds to refuse planning permission. The one thing I would say on that is that on, it is a point of detail, at paragraph 14 of the MPPF, there is a second part which effectively is a footnote which says where there are specific policies in the framework that would otherwise support effectively refusal, and this decision was largely based on that because it was impact on the conservation area and flood risk, etc., that brought about the refusal. So, Chairman, I just thought it was worth raising those two cases in particular. The final point I would make in terms of the overall appeal performance, within this 6-month period it's been relatively good. At the end of the 2014-15 reporting period, the council as a whole, so committee and officer decisions, we were actually having up to 44% allowed, so we were losing 44% of the appeals. In this period, and as of today, we have reduced that back down to around 24%, based on improved appeal performance on the ones that are reported here. So again, council-wide, so that is across both committee and delegated decisions. Chairman, I hope that update is of assistance.
Thank you. Just the Razors Farm one was much less than we budgeted for, wasn't it?
It was less than the initial settlement request, yes.
Oh, that's good. Right. The other item I was just going to mention to you. As you know, the Chief Executive asked for an internal audit into the rather large amount of money which we were costing the council by having contrary decisions being made, and at one stage it was looking at somewhere in the region of £800,000 of costs against us. That has been reduced to 700 odd. That report will be coming out to you all. And I just mentioned that Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Potter and Councillor Bound were all involved in an input into it, and just to give you an idea, I think it's a very good report, and there's some very good recommendations come out of it, which we've already been putting into action. So you can expect that to come in the next week.
Chair, can I just...
Please do.
Well, no, please. I don't know. I'm asking you. Can you clarify?
The report will be issued to them.
Yeah, I think, sorry, for the minute.
Yes, just going direct to them. And the other thing we've got to do is Mike's report. We've got to note the outcome of the appeal decisions and the reasons given for those. So, and do we do that? Agreed? Thank you. Anything else? Oh, yes, of the internal. We're going to propose to have an informal session to go through the report after you've had a chance to read it. How will we do a date on that?
After Christmas, I hope.
Yes.
Chair, again, it was hopefully just in terms of if it was for assistance. Normally with audit reports, so there's a report undertaken by the Council's internal audit team, comes up with a list of recommendations. Often they're around process issues through council departments, which the recommendations are then taken forward by officers in terms of improving processes and procedures, etc. This report was slightly different in that it also included, I suppose, the council-wide members and officers, how matters or processes can be improved. So it's just essentially seeking committee's view, if you like, as to whether an informal session, once you've had the opportunity to digest the report, would be useful just to run through those points and to see whether there's any other aspects that could be improved in terms of taking those recommendations forward ahead of, I believe I'm right, Chair, in saying that the recommendations would normally be then reported to audit and accounts in February,
yes,
as I understand it. So effectively, I think the thought was that informal meeting of committee members and officers could assist in terms of feeding back to that committee.
Right. That's it. Councillor Taylor, sorry.
Thank you for spotting my hand. Just a point of principle, really. I don't really quite like the expression that we're costing the council money. I hope that we'll be able to continue to make honest decisions on each of the cases as they come forward without feeling that we've got to second guess what a planning inspector might think of our decision. I'd rather think, rather than us costing the council money, I think we are being penalised for actually trying to make proper, good decisions based often on localism, which is one of the government's policies. So it's just a little point of principle that I would like to express. Thank you.
Yes, I rather agree with you, but the report doesn't look at us in that light, really. But you. Any questions on that? No? Councillor.
Can I just put it on record, although Councillor Tom and I think Councillor Bell and myself contributed to the report, we didn't pay anything financially. I mean, so.
Well, thank you all very much and have a very happy Christmas, because we won't meet till afterwards.